My name is Yara. I'm 24, and I grew up in a small town just outside Raleigh, North Carolina, a place where everything is politely labeled quaint until you don't fit in, and then it becomes suffocating. I've lived with vitiligo since I was 5. It started with a pale smudge under my chin, like I'd pressed my face into flour and forgot to wipe it off. By the time I was 12, it had spread across my arms, my chest, my shoulders, the curve of my jaw. My skin became a map of light and shadow, brown and cream, symmetry and chaos. Kids in school called it zebra skin, or paint splatter, or sometimes worse, things I don't repeat even in my own head. Adults didn't laugh, but they stared. Always stared. And sometimes that was worse. I learned early to smile first, to disarm, to lower my eyes just a little, to tilt my head like I was listening, to keep my sleeves long when I could. I mastered the art of not making people uncomfortable in my presence, even though it meant being uncomfortable in my own skin almost all the time. I stopped wearing makeup by 16. Not out of confidence, but out of exhaustion. No product could mask this. My skin rejected every cover-up, every attempt at symmetry. It insisted on being exactly what it was. And deep down, I think that terrified her, my mother. She was always beautiful, a classic kind of beautiful. Straight hair, even complexion, clear voice, perfect posture. I used to watch her move through rooms like she was water, fluid, quiet, leaving no trace. She could vanish into admiration. She wanted the same for me. But when she looked at me, I think all she saw was what didn't vanish. My skin marked me. I couldn't be hidden. And the older I got, the more that frightened her. The night before my high school graduation, she stood in the kitchen pouring coffee into a chipped mug and stared out the window like there was something out there worth seeing. I was walking in from the hallway and heard her say it. Not to me. Not exactly. She was talking to no one, to the silence, to the weight in the room. She said she sometimes wished I'd just come out normal. Her voice didn't crack. It wasn't angry or sad. It was flat, like she was stating a weather report. And she didn't even flinch when she turned and saw me standing there. Something in me folded in half, quietly, precisely, like paper. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there, trying not to breathe too loudly, as if somehow my presence, my body, my patchwork skin, my very being was already too much. She didn't apologize. She didn't take it back. She just sipped her coffee and asked if I'd laid out my dress for the ceremony, like we were strangers passing in a hallway, and not a mother and daughter who had just broken something neither of us would ever try to fix. That was the first time I realized she didn't see me as her reflection. She saw me as her flaw. The thing she didn't know how to smooth out. The proof that beauty could skip a generation. From that point on, everything between us felt staged. I was the extra she hadn't ordered, the version she hadn't prepared for, and all I could do was keep showing up in the skin I didn't ask for, in the body that refused to match her idea of acceptable. That night I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift across the room as the hours passed. I thought about all the girls in my class who would walk across the stage the next day in glossy curls and white teeth. The ones whose mothers had bought them new dresses and taken pictures and cried with pride. I wondered what my mother would feel when she saw me in my robe. If she'd flinch, if she'd force a smile, if she'd look away. And I wondered for the first time if it would always be like this, if every milestone would be weighed against the simple fact of my skin, if every moment that should have felt like victory would instead feel like apology. I didn't know then how long that feeling would last. I didn't know yet that it would take years, and someone who saw me differently, to finally unlearn her voice, But that night, before anything had changed, I knew one thing with aching clarity. The person who gave me life couldn't stand the way I looked living it. She said it was just a little project, something fun for the guests, something to flip through at the tables while they waited for the food to arrive. A photo album, she called it. Like it was casual, like it didn't matter. But the way she described it told me it did. She spent weeks collecting the pictures, printing them on thick paper with rounded corners, placing them carefully into pages with adhesive edges and transparent covers. She said she wanted it to reflect our family's journey, to show how far we'd come. She said it with pride, her voice full of ceremony, like she was curating history. I tried not to care. I told myself it was her thing, her narrative, her way of preparing for Lila's wedding, the child she could be proud of, the one who wore her skin like a dress stitched in tradition. I told myself not to ask, but I did. I asked if I could see it. She hesitated, just for a second, the kind of pause that tells you everything before a single word is spoken. Then she smiled that small, controlled smile I'd come to know so well, the one she used when she was choosing to lie gently rather than tell a painful truth. She handed it to me like it weighed nothing. I opened it slowly, the way you do when you already suspect what's inside might hurt. The cover was soft ivory, with gold lettering that read, "A Love Through the Years." Inside, the first page, held a photo of her and my father on their wedding day. Perfect, poised, young and untouched by disappointment. Then came the early years. Her pregnancy with Lila, their first apartment. My father holding my sister up on his shoulders in a pumpkin. Patch, page after page of memories. Birthdays, school events, family vacations. The images were so carefully chosen. They told a story. A neat one. A bright one. And I wasn't in it. Not once. Not in the background. Not peeking in from the edge. Not even in the blurry, accidental kind of way that people appear in family shots. It was like I had never been born. Or worse, like I had been erased. Rewritten. Edited out. I flipped through every page with a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The smile I wore cracked with every turn. I kept hoping. Just one photo. Just one moment where I hadn't been cropped or skipped or replaced. But it never came. She had built a version of our family where I didn't exist. And she would place this book on tables for others to see, for guests to smile over, to compliment her on, to say how beautiful her family was, how graceful her daughter looked, how lucky she was. I imagined their fingers flipping over those pages, never once asking who was missing. Never once seeing the hole where I should have been. I thought of all the photos I knew had existed, the ones I had once seen taped to the refrigerator or saved, in dusty boxes in the attic. Me with my front teeth missing, grinning too wide. Me holding a medal at the science fair. Me, standing next to Lila at Grandma's birthday, arms awkwardly wrapped around each other. They weren't perfect photos. I was never perfect in them. But they had been real. Now they were nowhere. I sat there, holding that album like it might burn me. My mother had gone into the kitchen, humming to herself, making tea like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just handed me proof that I was unwanted in the story she told about our lives. There was a chair nearby, and I remember gripping its edge just to steady myself. My face felt hot. My arms, exposed in the short sleeves I wore, looked suddenly loud, obscene, like maybe she'd left me out not to be cruel, but to protect the aesthetic she was building, the cohesion. I closed the book and placed it back on the table without a word. She asked me if I thought it looked classy. That was the word she used. Classy. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice not to shake. The room was silent except for the whistle of the kettle. Something in me tightened further as if confirming a suspicion I'd carried all my life but had never dared to say out loud. My presence in her life had always been negotiable, conditional, tolerated. I walked out without saying goodbye, and she didn't call after me. It started in 6th grade, the first time our school held what they called a social. Not a dance, not officially. Just a gathering in the gym with too loud music, cheap string lights, soda in plastic cups, and enough awkward energy to power the whole town. Everyone buzzed about who would dance with whom, passing notes and checking their breath in locker mirrors. I hadn't thought much about it until a girl in my class asked me who I was going with. I shrugged, laughing, pretending I didn't care. But the truth was, I did. I wanted to be chosen. Not as a joke, not as charity, just chosen. Like everyone else. That afternoon, I overheard 2 boys talking behind the portable classroom units. They were laughing, whispering about how gross my skin looked. One of them asked the other if he thought it was contagious. The other answered like it was obvious. Of course it was. He said his cousin had something like that once and the whole family got rashes. I remember standing there holding my books against my chest like a shield, as if I could press myself into invisibility. I didn't cry. I just walked away, but their voices followed me, bouncing off the pavement and into my ribs. At the dance, I stood near the bleachers. The room smelled like sweat and orange soda, and the air shimmered with anxiety. Girls clustered in corners. Boys shoved each other toward the dance floor, and teachers tried to look busy while pretending not to notice how cruel kids could be. I waited, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. No one was going to ask me. One boy walked past me, glanced once, and then veered sharply in the other direction like I had some invisible force field around me. And maybe I did. Maybe their fear wasn't really about catching something physical. Maybe it was the fear of being seen next to someone who didn't fit. Year after year, it was the same. Winter dances. Spring formals. Homecoming. They made jokes about spotlight dances and how I would be the literal spotlight. One boy told his friends he'd dance with me if they paid him $20. They laughed. I laughed too, pretending it was fine, pretending I was above it. But I'd go home and scrub my arms in the shower until the skin burned, as if effort could erase what birth had drawn. I memorized the location of every new patch as it appeared. On my hands, along my collarbone, across my left hip. I named them like cities on a map, because if they were going to be mine forever, I might as well make them familiar. Gym class was the worst. Partner activities always sent me straight to the back of the room. No one wanted to hold my hands. They said the skin felt weird, like wax paper. I'd get paired with whoever was absent-minded enough not to protest, and even then, they'd make sure to avoid touching my wrists. One girl brought hand sanitizer with her and used it every time she finished a drill with me. She never said, "Why?" She didn't have to. Even teachers weren't immune. I caught them glancing, pausing, asking softly if I'd seen a dermatologist lately. One health teacher suggested I wear long sleeves in class so the other students wouldn't feel distracted. That word sat with me for weeks. Distracted. As if my skin was loud. As if my presence disrupted the learning process. As if I was some bright, flashing alarm that pulled people off course. So I wore the sleeves. I stayed quiet. I tried to blend in, knowing full well that blending was impossible when your skin insists on contrast. I didn't have a single picture from any of the school dances. Not because I didn't attend. I went to most of them, showed up early, pretended to enjoy the decorations and the music. But I was never in the photos. People cropped me out, or I volunteered to take the picture, or I stood too far off to the side. It became a habit, this gentle self-removal, a learned reflex, a kind of survival. And all the while, my mother would ask why I never brought anyone home, why I never let her help with my hair, why I didn't try harder. She thought I was Just antisocial or maybe too proud. But she didn't know the looks I got, the whispers in the hallways, the sharp turns of boys who couldn't risk being seen next to someone who might stain their image. She didn't know what it felt like to walk into a room full of people your age and know, with aching certainty, that you are invisible in all the wrong ways. I carried that feeling into every interaction, every new group, every gathering. The unspoken truth settled in my bones. I wasn't just someone people didn't want to touch. I was someone they didn't want to be seen near. And over time, that feeling stopped stinging. It just became normal, like gravity, constant, heavy, unavoidable. She left it on my bed one morning, folded neatly inside a small paper bag from a department store that I hadn't visited in years. There was no note, no explanation, but the weight of it was immediate the moment I picked it up. I already knew what it was. The bag had that specific heaviness, the quiet insult of an unwanted gift. Inside was a long plastic tube of body foundation, one of those full coverage formulas made for performers, stage actors, or people with scars. It was expensive. I recognized the brand from late-night infomercials. It promised to blur imperfections, even tone, and restore confidence. The shade was called Neutral Beige. My skin had never been neutral. I didn't say anything. I just stared at it for a long time. Fingers curled tight around the edge of the bag like if I let go, it might scream. Later that day, she knocked on my door without waiting for an answer and sat down across from me like it was any normal day. She spoke gently, like she was offering advice. She said she'd seen it online, that it had amazing reviews, that it might make my arms and chest look less dramatic. She said it could help me feel more comfortable in public, that people wouldn't stare as much. Then she said the line that settled in my stomach like spoiled milk. Just something to use, so you don't scare people on the bus. She said it casually, like she was talking about weather or traffic, like it was a helpful suggestion and not a confession of shame. I felt my throat close before I could answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because if I spoke, I would scream. She didn't wait for a response. She patted my hand and walked out of the room, humming, as if she had just completed a good deed. I sat there with that tube in my lap and wondered how many years it had taken her to finally say it out loud. I remembered every time we sat together on public transportation, how she would subtly lean away if someone glanced at my arms, how she once pulled my sleeve down over my wrist when a child stared too long, how she always chose the seat by the window so I'd have to sit closest to the aisle, exposed. I used to think she was protecting me, helping me move through the world. But now I saw it clearly. She had always been managing me, curating me, trying to reduce the impact I had on other people's eyes. For a few days, I left the foundation untouched. Then one morning I opened it and tried a small patch on my upper arm. It didn't blend. It sat on top of my skin like a mask, heavy and false. The color was wrong, of course. It always was. My pigmentation didn't fade into neat borders. It wasn't something that could be smoothed over like a bad memory. I wiped it off before it dried, leaving a smudge across my skin like a failed cover-up. I stared at the mark in the mirror and felt something sharp rise in my chest. Not sadness, not even rage. Just exhaustion. The kind that settles in your bones after years of being told you're too much and still not enough. Later I found the tube again on my desk. She had placed it back there after cleaning my room. A small act of persistence, disguised as care. That's how she operated. Quiet, consistent erasure, coated in motherly concern. It wasn't that she wanted me gone. She just wanted me changed, softened, muted, edited. I left the tube on the front porch that night and never saw it again. She never asked what happened to it. I think she knew. Some part of her probably hoped I'd still buy a new one on my own. That maybe I'd come around. That I'd realize she was right. That looking like this was a burden. That wearing my truth without apology made things harder not just for me, but for her. Because I made her uncomfortable too. After that, she started buying me clothes with higher necklines, offered scarves when the weather didn't ask for them, gently suggested long sleeves for events that had cameras. It was never direct. She had mastered the art of implication, and I had mastered the art of pretending not to notice. But each time, the distance between us stretched a little further. Not in arguments, but in silence, in absence. In the growing realization that my mother did not see me. She saw a project unfinished, a mistake not yet corrected, a life that could have been easier if only the skin had cooperated. If only I had cooperated. I kept the receipt from the foundation, folded and hidden in the back of a drawer, not because I ever planned to return it, but because it felt like proof that I wasn't imagining it. That this wasn't just miscommunication, that there had been an offer made, one that told me plainly, the way you are is not okay, and I had declined, quietly, but fully. I had said no. And in that no, something in me hardened, something that would never smooth over again. When I got into medical school, she didn't cry. She didn't hug me, or call the relatives, or put my acceptance letter on the fridge like she had with Lila's cheerleading trophies. She nodded, said it was good I'd have something to focus on, and asked what I was going to wear to orientation. I remember holding my phone in one hand, my acceptance email still glowing on the screen, and feeling a hollow sort of pride. Like I'd achieved something massive but still hadn't earned her full attention. She said it was impressive, sure, but not surprising. I'd always been the serious one, the one who preferred books to makeup and silence to small talk. She meant it like a compliment, but it landed like a reminder. You're not like other girls. Don't forget that. Medical school was brutal. My body broke before my mind did, and that surprised me. The endless hours, the weight of expectation, the rotations that bled into sleepless mornings. I thought those would be the hardest part. But it wasn't. It was watching people treat me like I didn't belong. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because of how I looked. Patients flinched when I reached for their hands. One woman asked if my skin condition was a sign of illness. A man on the trauma floor pulled away when I tried to help him up, muttering something about witch skin under his breath. My professors never said anything cruel, but they never corrected those moments either. They just glanced over them, like I was a complication they didn't have time to solve. But I kept going. I passed every exam. I stitched wounds. I held dying hands. I stood for hours in operating rooms where no one saw my face, only my precision. I worked night shifts and comforted mothers and caught infants with trembling palms. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, this was how I would earn it. The love, the belonging. The moment when my mother would look at me and see someone worth more than her discomfort. Instead, she visited me one weekend in my second year. It was during a break between rotations, and I had just finished a 36-hour shift. I was exhausted, still in scrubs, my hair tied back, my vitiligo exposed along the lines of my collarbone. She sat across from me at a small cafe near the hospital and watched me sip my coffee like I was a stranger. Then, out of nowhere, she said I looked tired, that I should clean myself up a bit, that I'd scare off anyone who might actually take an interest in me. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out, brittle and sharp. I told her I had spent the night helping deliver a baby whose mother had gone into premature labor, that I'd saved a man who came in with a crushed chest and a fading pulse, that I hadn't slept in 2 days. She smiled and nodded, unimpressed, and then she said it, clear and simple, like a closing argument. You're just too strange. No man wants to be with a woman who looks like she's unfinished. The words landed like ice water, sudden, frigid, familiar. I had heard variations of them my whole life, wrapped in different packaging, but this was different. This was now. This was after everything I had done, everything I had proven. And still, she saw the marks first. Still, she measured me against her quiet standard of acceptability and found me lacking. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. I looked down at my hands, the same ones that had pulled people from death, the same ones that had been judged for their color, their shape, their contrast. I thought of how many times I'd scrubbed them raw in sinks, not just for hygiene but for some impossible purification. I thought of the faces I'd memorized in hospitals, people who cried when I held them, who said thank you with cracked voices, who called me angel or miracle or just simply doctor. None of that mattered to her. She didn't ask if I was seeing anyone, but she made sure I understood that if I wasn't, it was no mystery. I was too much, too strange, too bold in my silence, too visible in my skin. I wasn't soft enough, not romantic enough, not passive enough to attract love. I didn't look like a woman someone would dream about. I looked like a story someone would have to explain. After she left, I sat alone at that table long after the coffee went cold. My body ached. My brain fogged from exhaustion, but I stayed there, replaying every word. I knew she believed it. And, worse, I knew some part of me still feared she was right, but I also knew something else. Deep beneath the ache, below the exhaustion and the disappointment, something inside me held firm. The part of me that kept showing up, that kept touching patients, kept holding the scalpel, kept stepping into rooms that didn't want me. That part was still alive, bruised but alive. And one day I would meet someone who didn't just see it. He would stay, not because I had proven my worth, but because I never needed to. I did it on a Sunday. The clinic was quiet that morning, and the weight of the week still sat heavy in my shoulders. I hadn't slept much, and my face looked swollen in the bathroom mirror under the fluorescent light. I stared at myself for a long time, not because I didn't recognize what I saw, but because I did. For the first time, I didn't flinch. I saw the patches stretching over my scalp like islands in fog, creeping upward from my hairline. My vitiligo had started touching my hair a year before, shifting the pigment in my roots, scattering odd silvery strands among the dark ones. It was subtle at first, then sudden. My hair stopped growing in places. I noticed bald spots behind my ears, along the nape of my neck, under the crown. It felt like erosion, slow and irreversible. I used to tie it back. Then I started wearing hats, then scarves. Then I stopped looking at myself altogether. I told people it was stress-related, which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The truth was, my body had chosen its own pattern, its own evolution, and I could either keep fighting it or start listening. That morning, I plugged in the clippers and sat on the floor of my apartment. I stared straight ahead, breathing slow, and ran the blade through the center of my scalp. The sound was louder than I expected, buzzing like defiance. Hair fell into my lap in short, tired clumps. When I was done, I stood and brushed it all away, the floor littered with pieces of someone I didn't need to carry anymore. In the mirror, my reflection was stark, sharp, unapologetic. My scalp looked like a map, marked by contrast, by loss, by every cell that had refused to behave. I ran my fingers over the skin. It was soft, cool, alien, and mine. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still, like the noise had finally quieted. I took a photo, not to share, not to post, just to have. A record, a moment, of saying, this is what it looks like when you stop hiding. I called her that evening, Not to announce it, just to hear her voice. I hadn't told her about the hair. Part of me wanted to say it out loud, to give her a chance to surprise me, to accept something without flinching. But she didn't answer. I tried again later, then again. Days passed. Nothing. No calls. No texts. Just silence. Intentional. Precise. Familiar. The kind of silence that wasn't born of busyness or forgetfulness, but choice. She had seen the photo. I knew it. My cousin had shown her. She always shared updates with my mother when I was quiet for too long. And once she saw it, once the image of her daughter's bare scalp had settled into her mind, she had decided what she always decided: to retreat, to remove herself from the discomfort. I kept calling, not every day, but often enough that the rejection began to dull at the edges. It wasn't new. She had always withheld her love like a privilege, a reward for conformity. But this time felt different. This time, I hadn't just failed to meet her standard. I had rejected it altogether. I had stepped beyond her reach, and she didn't know how to follow. I left one voicemail. I told her I was okay, that I was still working, that I'd shaved my head because I was tired of pretending. I didn't ask her to understand. I just said I hoped she was well. I ended the call with no expectation. Weeks passed. Her name stayed quiet in my contacts. Holidays came and went. Family photos surfaced online. She posted a picture with Lila at a brunch, captioned, "My girls." I wasn't tagged. I wasn't even in the background. And yet, for all the absence, I felt lighter. I didn't miss the tension, the second guessing, the constant dance around her disappointment. I missed the idea of a mother, not the woman who carried that role. I missed what could have been, but not what was. Every morning, I rubbed lotion over my scalp, learning the curves of it like new geography. I wore hoops again. I wore bold lipstick. I walked into hospital rooms with my head uncovered. And yes, people stared. They always would. But now, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. My skin, my scalp, my face. They told a story I no longer needed to hide. A story my mother might never read, but I had learned to tell it anyway. I wasn't looking for anyone. Love wasn't even on the list. Not between shifts, not after nights spent trying to keep people alive on too little sleep and too much caffeine. My heart had grown quiet when it came to that kind of hope. After years of hearing I was too strange, too much, too visibly different to ever be wanted, I had stopped entertaining the idea that I could be seen through a lens other than tolerance. I didn't date. I didn't flirt. I avoided small talk in elevators and ignored glances in hallways. My world had become precise and controlled. I knew how to show up in a hospital room, how to chart symptoms, how to stay calm while others unraveled. Intimacy, though, that had always been the thing I kept locked away, a door I never let anyone knock on. He arrived in the middle of winter, a trauma rotation. He wasn't flashy, didn't try to take up space, didn't overcompensate for insecurity, with noise. He just worked. Quietly. Completely. Like he had nothing to prove and everything to learn. At first, I noticed him the way I noticed everyone, observing patterns, tracking how people moved, how they treated patients when no one was watching. But he noticed me differently. Not the way people usually did. Not with surprise or curiosity, or guarded politeness. He saw me and his gaze didn't shift away. He didn't overcorrect. He didn't pretend not to see the patches on my hands, or the tattooed vines that curved up my wrist, or the thin gleam of scalp that caught the light when I leaned over a chart. He didn't flinch. He stayed steady. The first time we spoke outside, of work, it was about something mundane. A coffee spill in the break room, an awkward encounter with a patient's overly affectionate dog. but his laughter was soft, not performative, and it didn't end with that tight smile people give when they're not sure how to interact with me. I found myself responding, slowly, cautiously, like warming my hands near a fire I wasn't sure would stay lit. Over the following weeks, we kept running into each other. Not by design, just in the natural rhythm of hospital life. He asked thoughtful questions, listened without interrupting, never once commented on my appearance, but somehow always made me feel seen. Not the kind of seeing that scans for flaws, but the kind that lingers on your presence and says, "I'm here with you." And over time, my armor loosened, just slightly. One evening, after a particularly long shift, we sat in the staff lounge with our backs against the wall, the lights dimmed and the silence between us comfortable. I was too tired to filter myself. My scarf had slipped from my head hours ago. My hands were bare, my skin patchwork and soft in the low light. I told him I used to think I had to fix myself before anyone could love me. He didn't respond right. Away. Then he said the words I didn't know I'd been waiting to hear. He told me I was the most whole person he had ever met. Not brave, not strong, not inspirational. Whole. Like I wasn't a series of exceptions or workarounds. Like I wasn't missing anything. Like nothing needed to be covered, repaired, excused. It didn't come out dramatic or heavy. It came out like truth. Simple, clear, undeniable. I didn't cry. I thought I might. Instead, I breathed, deeply, like my lungs had suddenly remembered how. We started seeing each other outside the hospital, slowly, quietly. He never made me feel like I had to perform softness or femininity or normalcy. I didn't have to hide the places where my pigment had faded, or the scars from old treatments that never worked. He ran his fingers over my scalp like it was something sacred, not strange. He kissed the hollows of my neck without hesitation. When I looked at him, I didn't see someone trying to rescue me or reshape me. I saw someone willing to sit beside me in the quiet and call it love. He met my mother once. Briefly. She was distant, guarded, and afterward she called me and asked if he knew what he was signing up for. I told her he did, fully, and that he wasn't signing up for anything. He was choosing me. That was the last time she brought him up. Being loved by him didn't heal the parts of me she broke, but it reminded me that they could be lived with, that I didn't have to be fixed to be held. That wholeness isn't perfection. It's presence. It's truth. And in him, I found space to be unhidden. For the first time, I stopped asking if I was too strange. I stopped wondering if I was too much. I was enough. I always had been. He just helped me believe it. The ceremony was small, not because we couldn't have made it bigger, but because we chose not to. I didn't want a hall full of strangers or 1,000 curated photos on social media. I wanted quiet. I wanted presence. I wanted to remember every moment without filters. We held it in a greenhouse just outside the city, glass walls fogged with early spring humidity, vines curling through iron beams, soft light pouring through the ceiling like grace. The chairs were simple. The guests were few. Everyone who sat in them knew me, really knew me, and wanted to be there. That was enough. More than enough. She came. I didn't invite her, but she came. I found out later that my sister had called her, said she would regret it if she stayed home. I wasn't sure how I felt when I saw her walk in, dressed in pale blue, sitting in the back row like she didn't want to be noticed. She didn't meet my eye. She scanned the venue like it was a place she couldn't quite belong to. I felt no anger, just distance. A kind of ache that had dulled over time into something almost indistinguishable from calm. I wore a sleeveless dress. I had designed it myself, cut to show the edges of my vitiligo along my shoulders and collarbones. to let the marks on my arms speak without apology. My scalp was uncovered. My earrings were bold. I didn't wear foundation. I wanted to walk down the aisle as myself. Not as a version that was easier to look at, not as a compromise. Just me, fully. He stood at the altar, waiting. Not in a tuxedo, but in a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, hands calm, face steady. When our eyes met, the room softened around the edges. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. We didn't write long vows. We didn't need to. Our promises were made in quiet gestures. In the years that led us here. In the way he reached for my hand even when it shook. In the way he memorized every patch of contrast on my body like a sacred map. He didn't have to say he loved me despite my skin. He loved me through it. Because of it. As part of it. When the officiant asked if we wanted to exchange a gesture, something personal before the rings, he stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He placed both hands gently on my shoulders, looked at me for a long, still moment, then leaned in and kissed the pale, depigmented patch on the side of my neck. The one that had always drawn the most stares. The one a boy once called rotting skin. The one my mother had once offered to cover with concealer before a family photo. He kissed it with the softness of someone who knew exactly what it cost me to bear it. And he did it in front of everyone. No flourish. No dramatics. Just truth. There was a stillness in the room that followed. Thicker than silence. Fuller than sound. And in that stillness, I looked up. My eyes found her in the back row. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She was watching me with something far more complicated than either. And then, slowly, she looked away. Not in shame. Not in discomfort. Not in the tight, embarrassed way she used to when strangers stared at me on the subway, or when I wore something that revealed too much of my difference. This time, she looked away with defeat. Quiet, unmistakable defeat. Because in that moment, she saw the one thing she had never allowed herself to believe. That I didn't need her approval. That I had built a life without her blueprint. That love had found me in the very place she had always tried to cover. That what she saw as my flaw had become the altar where someone else laid their reverence. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. And when we walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, the light spilled through the glass like it was blessing every part of me she once asked me to hide. I didn't turn around to see if she was watching. I didn't need to.